Hello, this is the fourth session of Through the Bible, Eternity Past to Eternity Future. We're still in the patriarchs. This is the last time, though, the dispensation of promise. Today, our main presentation is Joseph. If you notice down below, I have my email address. If anybody watching these presentations would like to have these PowerPoints for reference or to use yourselves in presenting this information, just email me and I will send them to you. Last week, we talked about the ancient Jewish wedding, and there were some questions. And I love questions because then I need to go back and research and find information. And Barbara, you asked, was the ketubah, was it written? And the answer is yes, it is written. I found out that there is someone now in Israel that will actually do an ancient Jewish wedding for you. So if you want to go to Israel and get married and have this kind of wedding, it's available to you. I thought that was really neat. The ketubah is written, and there are online formats for people that want to create those now. The betrothal, the marriage contract between the bride and the groom and their families. The other thing I found out was the wine cup. I had left it out completely in the discussion, and it is really important because once the contract and the ketubah is presented to the family, the way the bride signals that she accepts a proposal is to take a sip from the wine cup. Well, think about it a minute. The Last Supper, the wine and the bread, the communion, that was symbolic. That was the betrothal acceptance.
That gives me chills.
Me too.
Eh,
The
Well,
other, I went online and I found pictures. I couldn't think of the word litter, and now I know the actual Hebrew name for the bridal carriage, I'll call it. It's an aperion. And a gentleman in Israel has constructed those to use in those weddings. And then the huppah, that's where the consummation of the ceremony took place. Today, where I said we're going to talk about Joseph, but we have a little excerpt of story in Genesis 38. That's the story of Judah and Tamar. Interesting reading for the Bible. You wouldn't think that it would be there, but it has a purpose, and it has a very important purpose. There's something, and it's codified in Deuteronomy, for it is a mandate that if a man marries and then dies before he has children, that it is the duty of a brother to marry that wife and produce children through her, so his brother will have a lineage. And in Ruth, we're going to talk about that whole concept a lot more. But it's first presented here. Judah's number one son, marries Tamar, and then I said he dies, but actually it sounds like God killed him because of his deeds. Then son 2, Onan, married Tamar. He refused to produce children through her. He wanted to have the sex, but he didn't want the responsibility of kids. And God killed him also. And so Judah promised Tamar that his third son, who was really young, would fulfill the responsibility of the Levirate marriage. And he kind of, after seeing his other two sons die, he thought better of that, and he didn't live up to his word. So Tamar decided she'd take matters into her own hands, which seems to be a practice of a lot of the Jewish women in that era. And she acted like she was a prostitute and knew where Judah was going to be. She lured him to sleep with her and was smart enough to keep evidence of who it was that slept with her. The result was that she got pregnant and had twin boys. Judah, you'd think Judah was going to have her burned for being a prostitute, committing adultery, but then he stopped and realized that he was the one that had been in the wrong.
Did he do that on his own, or did God help him understand that?
I'm pretty sure God must have helped him understand that. And I think if he hadn't have understood it, we'd have a whole different story, because Judah is the man that's in the lineage of Christ. And interestingly enough, the Pharaoh, Tamar's child, the one that was fighting to be the firstborn because his brother stuck his arm out first, and then he was pulled back and Pharaoh was born first. He is in the line of Christ. So you have both Tamar and her son Pharaoh in Christ's line. And it's interesting how many times Gentile women show up in the line of Christ. There was a reason for sticking this chapter right in the middle of the story of Joseph. It had an absolute purpose because it was a key factor in the lineage of Christ. The story is about Jesus. This whole book is about Jesus. There's another wild piece in this chapter 38. Now, we talked about numbers and how the Jewish rabbis are looking at numbers and codes, etc. So someone decided to look at every 49th letter interval in this chapter. And what that produces are five names: Boaz, Ruth, Obed, Jesse, and David. These are the ancestors, the five ancestors of David. This chapter was written hundreds of years before Boaz and Ruth. I'm guessing at least 400 years, maybe 5. And these folks are in order. They are the lineage of Christ, the ancestors of King David. So now I go back to our real lesson for today, or what we said we were going to study, Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite Bible characters. He is a type of Christ in the Old Testament. I'm going to go through his story, but we're going to look at over 50 incidents that are a direct parallel to the life of Jesus. We're going to go chapter by chapter of his story, and in chapter 37 of Genesis, we find out that his dad loved him more than anybody else. He was given the beautiful coat of many colors. Always one of my favorite stories when I was a little kid. I asked for that story. My grandmother told me Bible stories over and over again, and I continually asked for a repeat of the coat of many colors story in Joseph. He dreamed that he saw a field with bundles of grain, and there were 12 bundles of grain. He had 11 brothers, remember, and that 11 of those bundles bowed down to his bundle. Then he had another dream about the sun, moon, and the star, and 11 stars, which his dad even understood as his mom, his dad, and his 11 brothers, and them bowing down to him. That didn't set well with the rest of the family. Not only the fact that he was loved more, but the fact that he was telling them that they were going to bow down to him, and they plotted to kill him. Dad sent him out to the field to check on them, make sure everything was okay, and they saw him coming, created a plan to kill him. Reuben was the person, remember, that intervened and said, no, let's just throw him in the pit. They sold him instead to passers-by, Ishmaelite traders, for 20 pieces of silver. And that was Judah's idea. Instead of killing him, let's sell him. Let's make some money from this. They took his coat. They killed a wild animal, made sure the coat was bloody, and sent it back to his dad. Interesting here, remember Jacob means the deceiver. He deceived his own father. And there was kind of a coat involved. It was they put the hair on his arms to make him feel like he was his brother Esau. Jacob was repaid many times for his deception. So the traders sell Joseph to Potiphar, who was the captain of Pharaoh's guard. I found 60 parallels in writing to Joseph and Jesus. According to some authors, there are over 100 parallels. So we're going to go through them chapter by chapter. Joseph was a shepherd. Jesus is called the Good Shepherd. Joseph was beloved by his father. Remember when he was baptized? The voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." He lived with his father in honor before going down. John tells us in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. Jesus lived in honor with his Father before being sent to earth. Joseph was hated by his brothers. Jesus was hated by his brothers. Joseph foretold his future sovereignty, and Jesus did the same. Joseph was sent by his father to his brothers for their welfare, and Jesus was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Joseph's brothers plotted to kill him. The Jews plotted to kill Christ. Joseph's brothers did not believe his dreams, and Jesus' message was not believed. We aren't going to be able to read all 60 of these, but if you have time, pause this video and read them for yourself. Or you can email me and request the PowerPoint, then you have your own copy. We skipped chapter 38, go to chapter 39. When he went into Potiphar's house, he was so effective as a servant that he was put in charge of the whole house. Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, and he refused. And then he was thrown into jail. I read one author said Potiphar evidently really believed him instead of his wife, or he would have had him killed.
Mm-hmm.
He probably knew who she was. But he threw him into jail, and within a very short time, the jailer puts him in charge of the entire jail. He must have been a pretty impressive personality.
Well, and I got the impression, it was God's hand that made all of that happen for him.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. So God had a plan for Joseph that replicated his plan for Jesus. So here we have more. Both were servants. Both would be prosperous. Isaiah said, "My servant will prosper. He will be highly exalted." Both pleased their masters. At Jesus' baptism, the voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Both were tempted. Of Jesus it was said, "He was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." You can read the rest of these. On to chapter 40. He's in prison with the baker and the cupbearer, the wine taster. They have some dreams, the cupbearer saw a grapevine with 3 branches, and those branches produced clusters of grapes. He squeezed juice from the grapes into the cup and placed it in Pharaoh's hand. That was his dream. The baker saw 3 baskets of pastries on his head. Birds came and ate those pastries. He started out with interpreting dreams as God's business. He acknowledged that it wasn't him, that it was God. The interpretation of the dreams were, or the cupbearer would, in 3 days, be reinstated to his position, and the baker, in 3 days, would be killed. He said to the cupbearer, "Please remember me to Pharaoh." Here are the analogies to Jesus from that. Pause the video and check these out, or order the PowerPoints. Moving on in the story, chapter 41, the dreams of Pharaoh. Pharaoh saw 7 thin cows and 7 fat cows. He saw 7 thin heads of grain, and he saw those devour the 7 healthy ones. At that point, the cupbearer says, "Oh yeah, I remember I met this guy in prison, and he was able to interpret my dream and let me know that I was going to be reinstated." They think it was about 2 years later, by the way, that happened. And so Joseph is called up, and I have a little piece of a figure of information here that relates to the analogies. When Joseph was called from the prison to interpret those dreams, he was 30 years old. Jesus was 30 years old when he started his ministry, as we'll see in a second. So God revealed the dream to Joseph, and he was able to tell Pharaoh that there was a famine coming, and that the cows devouring the cows meant that there'd be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. The same analogy was true of the grain. Pharaoh said, "What shall we do?" and asked for some guidance, and Joseph was quick to say, this should be your plan. Find a good man and have that person make sure that during the seasons of plenty, the grain is put into storage, so that during the famine, there would be grain to feed the people. As a result, Pharaoh immediately recognized that the man for the job was standing right in front of him. It was Joseph, and he made him prime minister of Egypt. He gave him a wife, he gave him a signet ring, put fine linen clothing on him, a gold chain around his neck, and a chariot to move around the kingdom as the second in command. The Bible tells us that everybody bowed to Joseph. The king gave him a name, a new name, that meant a revealer of secrets. So Joseph stored those massive amounts of grain in various cities around the country, thinking ahead so that people from other countries in famine could come over and buy grain, and it would build the coffers of the Pharaoh. And 2 sons were born to him at this time, Ephraim and Manasseh. 2 pages of parallels follow chapter 41. You can pause and read them, or you could order the PowerPoints. So chapter 42. Joseph's brothers were also in the famine in the land of Canaan, and they needed to come and buy food in Egypt. So the first trip, the brothers come, all but Benjamin, and Joseph immediately recognizes them. When I read about his plan, he accused them of being spies. It sounds like he's going to get even, which would be the natural thing to do. But he had a plan to see who they were and how they had changed. So first he accused them of being spies. Then he got to talking to them and made sure that Benjamin was still alive. Then he demanded that they bring Benjamin back to him. Simeon is the one that agrees to stay as a hostage, basically, until they bring Benjamin back. Joseph can see now that they're guilt stricken. When he realized that they were beginning to see that point, he had to leave the room and weep. Actually, but there are 7 times in this foretelling of the story that Joseph is seen leaving the room and weeping. He put money in their sacks. When they got home and opened their sacks, they saw that all the money that they had spent or thought they had spent for the grain was there. And it was an interesting test there. What were they going to do with that money? So in chapters 43 and 44, we had the second trip of the family. They went home. They told their dad that the ruler of Egypt wanted them to come back with Benjamin, and he kept Simeon as a hostage till that happened. And Jacob wasn't willing for a long time to do that because he had already lost one of his special sons. They were both, remember, Joseph and Benjamin were the sons of his beloved wife. Judah guaranteed the safety of Benjamin. In fact, he said, "You can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back." Jacob finally consented because they were desperate. They were all about to die. And they made the plan that the money that they found in their sacks, they would take that money back plus enough money to purchase more grain. When they got back to Egypt, Joseph had them sent to his own home, and he released Simeon and brought Simeon there with his brothers. When they got there and Joseph was reunited with Benjamin, there again his heart broke. He had to leave and weep and get self-composure before he could go back in with his brothers and play out his plan. The brothers were seated at the table in their birth order. So when they were left, Joseph ordered his silver cup to be placed in Benjamin's sack. Joseph sent people out to stop them, find the cup. He wanted to see how they would respond to having Benjamin at risk. And Judah it's a really interesting plea. He wanted to take Benjamin's place. 7 more parallels appear between the lives of Joseph and Jesus in Genesis 42 through 44. Moving right along with the story, Genesis 45 through 50, the story is all about forgiveness. Jesus is all about forgiveness. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. We don't often quote the next one. For God came not into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Jesus is all about love and forgiveness. So a tearful Joseph revealed his true identity to his brothers in chapter 45. He absolved his brothers of the guilt. One of the first things he said to him is, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Joseph recognized that this whole plan came right straight from God from the very beginning, from the getting thrown in a pit to being prime minister of a land to having his brothers being reunited with him. Ye meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. I've looked at that a lot of times through my life. I think something is bad. Why did God let that happen to me? But I realize before long, I thought it was bad. I thought it was evil. but there was something that God was working out to bring good. So he sent for his family. He sent for Jacob and the family to move to Egypt. And Pharaoh agrees that the land of Goshen, that was the best of the land, would be given to Jacob's family. And interesting to me, that land is about 40 miles south of Cairo. Jacob brought his whole family. There were 66 family members, and you have one chapter that tells everybody's names. And with the 4 people in his family, that made 70. So there were 70 people that started as a group in Egypt. Remember, Abraham was told they were going to be there. They were going to be slaves for 400 years in Egypt. That was prophesied. Well, from the time they became slaves, that was the truth. And that 70 people became a multitude, and their wealth increased. They had the best land. When they left Egypt, they were rich people. So Jacob comes back with his sons. The father and the son are reunited. It's a heartwarming scene. And one of the first things Jacob tells his son, I'm here, but I want you to take me back to the promised land, to the cave of Machpelah. Remember, take me back there to bury me. So Abraham's prophecy begins. They're now in Egypt. There are 8 additional parallels related to chapters 45 through 50. I would like to talk about the first one listed. Joseph was revealed to his brothers at their second coming. This is really profound. The second coming of Christ is not the rapture of the church. The second coming of Christ is when Christ returns, and he returns with his church, because he returns with white-robed people on horses for the battle of Armageddon. When he returns, the Bible says that he sets his foot on the Mount of Olives. In person he returns. He stands on the Mount of Olives, and there's a great earthquake. We'll get to all of that story later. But that is the second coming of Christ. Moving on, Joseph was revealed as a man of compassion. Jesus wept. Actually, that scripture, that's the shortest scripture in the Bible, by the way. But when that happened, Jesus was sitting on a hill. He was looking at Jerusalem, and he was weeping over the fact that he knew that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed in the near future. Jacob became Israel. Remember, Jacob, when he wrestled with the angel in the last week's lesson, his name was changed to Israel, but we're still hearing the name Jacob. Israel is the name of the 12 tribes. Israel is the name of the nation. In Egypt, the tribes become a nation. Jacob adopts Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob blesses the rest of his sons in Genesis 49. We have the beginning. Do you get the play on words there? This is the Genesis of the 12 tribes of Israel.
Yeah.
Jacob's blessing on Judah is really interesting. It's worth looking at. Well, they all are, but it would take too long. Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will grasp your enemies by the neck. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah, my son, is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until Shiloh comes. That's King James. The NLT says, the coming of the one to whom it belongs. The one whom all nations will honor. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. Do you
Wow.
see the prophecy in there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about the scepter will not depart from Judah in a minute, but go to the rest of this. The one who all nations will honor, he ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. Do you remember the story of Passover when Jesus entered on the foal of a donkey?
Right.
It was the first time that he allowed the people to call him king. This is a prophecy. This starts with Judah, but it's a prophecy of Jesus.
Mm.
His robes, he washes his robes in the blood of grapes. It starts out with Judah, but it goes straight to the prophecy of Jesus. Now look at the scepter. Look at that verse. The scepter will not depart from Judah. The scepter refers to a tribal identity and the right to apply and enforce Mosaic laws and to adjudicate capital offenses. So that whole term has to do with the tribes retaining their own authority. In AD 6 and 7, Herod's son, Archelaus, I guess, was dethroned and banished, and a Roman procurator named Coponius was put in his place. When that happened, now this is AD 6 or 7, the legal power of the Sanhedrin was restricted. The Romans took over, and the adjudication of capital punishment cases was lost. And this information comes from Josephus, the Jewish historian. That had not happened from the beginnings of the Jewish nation. It didn't even happen during the Babylonian captivity. The Sanhedrin, their ruling body, held their rights to enforce the Jewish law. But when Coponius came to power as a Roman procurator, he was not part of Herod's family. He was an
Mm.
Assyrian. He usurped the Jewish right to judge their own folks. They could not have capital punishment. That's why they had to go to Pilate. They couldn't crucify Jesus on their own. They had to have the Roman authority back them. And when this happened, the Jews mourned, said that the priests put the sackcloth and ashes thing and mourned in the streets because they thought God's promise that they would have perfect control of their nation had been broken. Shiloh represents the Messiah. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. They would have complete power until Shiloh comes. They saw that as their prophecy. They thought God had broken it because now Coponius had taken away that power, and they didn't know the Messiah had come. We believe Jesus was born between 4 and 6 AD. Shiloh was already there. He had come. He was a baby in Nazareth. Is that incredible? In the blessing on Judah, Jacob didn't know he was prophesying, but he was. He said, the scepter, the right to rule, the right to make the decisions and punish people for capital punishment, etc., will not depart from Judah, from the tribes of Israel. In Jesus' day, it was the Sanhedrin, until Shiloh comes. Shiloh is the Messiah. It didn't happen until AD 6 or 7, when the Romans made an Assyrian procurator over Jerusalem. He then had the power that had once belonged to the Sanhedrin. They thought that that prophecy, that blessing had been lost, and Shiloh had not come, not understanding that Jesus was the Messiah. And that's where we stop for the day.
Right.